Both suffering and happiness are of an organic nature, which means they are both transitory. They are always changing. The flower, when it wilts, becomes the compost. The compost can help grow a flower again. Happiness is also organic and impermanent by nature. It can become suffering, and suffering can become happiness again. If you look deeply into a flower, you see that a flower is made only of non-flower elements. On that flower, there is a cloud. Of course, we know a cloud isn't a flower, but without a cloud, a flower can't be. If there's no cloud, there is no rain, and no flower can grow. You don't have to be a dreamer to see a cloud floating in a flower. It's really there. Sunlight is also there. Sunlight isn't a flower, but without sunlight, no flower is possible. If we continue to look deeply into the flower, we see many other things like the earth and the minerals. Without them, a flower cannot be. So it's a fact that a flower is made only of non-flower elements. A flower can't be by herself alone. A flower can only interbe with everything else. You can't remove the sunlight, the soil, or the cloud from the flower. In each of our plum village practice centers around the world, we have a lotus pond. Everyone knows we need to have mud for lotuses to grow. The mud doesn't smell so good, but the lotus flower smells very good. If you don't have mud, the lotus won't manifest. You can't grow lotus flowers on marble. Without mud, there can be no lotus. It is possible, of course, to get stuck in the mud of life. It's easy enough to notice mud all over you at times. The hardest thing to practice is not allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by despair. When you are overwhelmed by despair, all you can see is suffering everywhere. Everywhere you look. You feel as if the worst thing is happening to you. But we must remember that suffering is a kind of mud that we need in order to generate joy and happiness. Without suffering, there's no happiness. So we shouldn't discriminate against the mud. We have to learn how to embrace and cradle our own suffering and the suffering of the world with a lot of tenderness. When I lived in Vietnam during the war, it was difficult to see our way through that dark and heavy mud. It seemed like the destruction would just go on and on forever. Every day, people would ask me if I thought the war would end soon. It was very difficult to answer because there was no end in sight. But I knew if I said, "I don't know," that would only water their seeds of despair. So when people asked me that question, I replied, "Everything is impermanent, even war. It will end someday." Knowing that, we could continue to work for peace. And indeed, the war did end. Now the former mortal enemies are busily trading and turning back and forth, and people throughout the world enjoy practicing our traditions, teachings on mindfulness. If you know how to make good use of the mud, you can grow beautiful lotuses. If you know how to make good use of suffering, you can produce happiness. We do need some suffering to make happiness possible. And most of us have enough suffering inside and around us to be able to do that. We don't have to create more.